Hello and welcome back to Hellbound Garage, where we are prepping and painting the engine bay of the 280Z. As you can tell, we still have the paint booth setup going on around here, and that is because we're still painting. The epoxy primer has been given a few days to completely cure. Now, in order to do the next step with epoxy primer, which is in my case going to be some high build primer, we are going to use some 320 grit sandpaper. That way we can give the filler primer a nice surface to adhere to while not taking the epoxy primer off the metal. This also gives me a chance to get rid of some of the light imperfections, some of the weird texture that I got in the very corners, and then we can go from there. So let's get at it. It's going to be real quick, sanding down with 320. We have the engine bay all sanded. If you can tell, or well, as you can see, it is pretty easy to tell where you've sanded and where you haven't with this epoxy primer. It turns the light gray when you start sanding on it. Makes it super easy for this stage. And if you're curious about the frame rails are going to be coated with something completely different. So I just figured I would use that as the line. And yeah, that whole area is going to be completely different color. But now I need to blow this all off and then wipe it down, which I won't video. And then we'll jump into the filler primer. Don't mind the mess, but this is actually post-spraying because I forgot to tell you about this beforehand. But this is the primer that we're using. It's a high build by Speedcoat. I actually had another product selected and was trying to purchase, but for whatever reason, it must be a chemical that's inside of it that wouldn't ship to Wisconsin, so I'm not really sure what that's all about. But instead, we got this because Speedcoat ships anywhere, and it's 50 state legal, and it was from Amazon. So yeah, you know, it worked out. Seeing we used the Speedcoat epoxy, kind of made sense to use the Speedcoat high build. It is a 4:1:1, just like the epoxy. The second one is a reducer if you want to, but they don't recommend it with the high build primer. And just like before, we got the trusty Harbor Freight special. Gonna set it up the best I can. The fan should be a little better because this stuff is a lot thinner, or it was a lot better, I should say. All right, so you saw a time lapse of the first coat. This is actually after 3 coats. Let me tell you, if you want to hide something, paint it black. If you want to show everything, paint it white. It is crazy what this shows. It shows all the ripples that the black was hiding, everything. It's crazy. But I still had an issue in this corner and this corner, and I think it has something to do with the fan pattern and the fact that it's super close proximity. There's no real place for the atomized paint to go, so it just kind of all settles in that one area. It's a real pain. On the second and the third coat, I actually turned the fan almost to a circle and sprayed in the edges of the engine bay to coat everything, and then I readjusted the fan so it was back to being wider to spray the rest of the area. It's there. It is what it is. I'm gonna sand everything down after it dries with a 600 grit sandpaper, and if I still have texture or it goes all the way back down the epoxy primer, then I will just end up probably getting some like parts store primer that's in a can and just spray it in those small sections, because it doesn't have near as much pressure and the fan is a lot smaller, so it shouldn't have that same effect. But anyways, we'll see how that turns out after it's done drying. It says it takes about an hour without an oven, anywhere to an hour to hour and a half, and then I'll see what it looks like after that and what it looks like after sanding. Probably won't show any more sanding because, let's face it, that crap's boring, but I will check back in with you in a little bit. Don't mind the hairdo. I really can't do anything about it because this is what my hands look like, because I decided to do this. Instead of just sanding the corners that I knew had some issues, I decided to spray what's called a guide coat on the entirety of the engine bay, and that helps you see high and low spots, allows you to get rid of orange peel that you see. You can see here this section that I've already been doing. You can see the low spots here, and then you can see like the seam sealer and stuff that you can't really do anything about, and there's a bunch of gobbledygook there. But yeah, I now decided to sand down the entire engine bay. I'm not really sure what I was thinking because this is a race car. But yeah, this spot alone, to sand it down with 500 grit, which is like the finishing sandpaper that you're supposed to use, it's taken like hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. I'm not really sure at this point. It's a lot of work. I have no idea what I was thinking doing this, because it's a race car. It's not supposed to be a show car. And if I wanted it to be a show car, then the low spots that I see, I would go back with some filler and smooth it out. But I am not doing that. So just an update, and we're going to keep going. A little bit of hat head since the last time you saw me, but my hands are clean. And that's because, well, as you can tell, I've got somewhere. I got smart and switched over to a 320 grit to do most of the shaping of the high build primer, and that helped a little bit, but it is Friday, and that last clip was Sunday. So this has taken most of my free time throughout the week to get it this far. Now I'm going to go back through and use some, I have some 400 grit. So 400 to 600 grit is what they say is like the finishing sanding for this primer before you spray the top coat or color. So now that I've got the guide coat off and that most of this is relatively smooth, and the 400 grit is getting rid of the scratches left by the 320 grit, I hope this doesn't take terribly long. The plan is to paint it tomorrow morning, so I gotta get to work. But I'll check back in when this is all hit with 400 grit. Oh, wow, my eyes look bloodshot. Anyways, it's like 10:30 at night, and yeah, this is what it looks like after hitting it with the 400 grit. It surprisingly took a lot less time than the 320, but that's because the 400 was to get rid of some of the scratches from the 320. That's essentially, at this point, that is what is happening with the sandpaper. Each level of grit past the 320 is just to get rid of more and more of the scratches. So the 320 has a pretty coarse scratch to it, which is what helps get rid of all the filler and the Bondo quicker than the higher grit. And the higher you go up, the smaller the grit gets, which means the smaller scratches get. And you progressively go up to like 3,000, 4,000 for fine polish. But the 400 to 600 gets rid of the scratches from the shaping stage, is what they call it. So I hit it with 400, and then I hit it with wax and grease remover. I did that for 2 coats all the way around. I actually started with the Excel Auto Body products, but I've had this can for a while and I actually ran out. So then I ran to AutoZone and grabbed this real quick just to be able to finish. Both of them seem to be about the same, and to help and get the most dirt and grime and filler off the paint, I put it in one of these guys, sprayed it directly to the panel, and then wiped the panel down from there. And there's some of the rags from it. But even after that, even after wiping it down twice, directly or immediately after that, I went through with a tack cloth, and I'm not sure if you can see it. There is a whole lot of dirt still on the panels. This tack cloth it's hard to explain, but it's kind of sticky, and it picks up all the fine particles that are still left behind. And it's surprising how much dirt and particles are still on the surface even after wiping it down twice. So it's definitely a good purchase. I mean, these are only like $1.90 a piece, and they make a world of difference. Tomorrow I have a brand new one of these that I will open up, and I'll do a final wipe down of the engine bay, as well as pick up all of the stuff from the sanding process, and then relay my plastic back over here to make sure that none of the sanding dust that is on the ground gets picked up by the air pressure of the paint. So yeah, that's it for the night. I'll be back in the morning to tack cloth this, and then I finally get to lay paint, and it's going to be perfect because I actually go on vacation tomorrow. Kind of a vacation. I'm going to be working during my vacation, but and my mom is going to be staying at my house watching the dogs, so it'll give it several days to bake, to cure, and that way when I come back, everything should be perfect. I can move to the next step. But that's only if the paint lays good tomorrow. So we'll skip forward to tomorrow, and we'll see how it goes. It is the next morning, and I am already fighting the heat and the humidity. I didn't realize that today, which is the only day within the next week that I have time to paint, is also the hottest, most humid day of the week. So, trying to get this done early. Normally I wouldn't do anything in my garage till 9-ish, because that gives my neighbors plenty of time to be awake and whatnot. Saturday around here, I do have a lot of like older neighbors, so they should already be up. Normally I wouldn't turn on my compressor, but in this case I gotta do this and I gotta get it done before things get too bad. This is my choice of color for the engine bay, a whole earth brown fire mist. I wanted a metallic, flaky, brown paint because they just look cool. I wanted something else originally, but adding up the total cost, it was gonna be like $300 or $400 for the paint. And this is my first time doing this, so the last thing I want to do is spend that money on paint and have it ruined by either my technique or like my gun. So we went with this restoration shop, whole earth brown fire mist. This is an 8-to-1 system, so 8 parts this guy, 1 part this, and we'll get it mixed up into our cup and we will get spraying. That first coat is looking really good. I'm gonna let it tack up for about 10 minutes while I clean the gun and mix a little bit more paint, just because I know I'm not gonna have enough to finish it, and then lay down a second coat. I really hope the second coat turns out as good as the first coat, but we'll find out.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
WTF, I really did that? Are you kidding me? It looks so good. Look at that. So it still has to dry. And I'm kind of hoping it keeps the same kind of look after it's dry. I still had problems there. Don't mind the reflection, but in that corner and in that corner there, I still had the same problem. Not really sure what that's all about, but I'm gonna let this dry and we'll see the total results. I know I had a run in the first coat that I used a tape trick to try and level it out. Didn't work that great. And then I sprayed a second coat. So I already see a little bit of orange peel and a little bit of run. So I'm definitely gonna have to take like 1,000 grit and sand it down smooth. But at this point, I'm willing to do it because it turned out way better than what I thought. Hopefully, after it dries, it looks the same. All right, at this point, I think I'm gonna close out the video. I'm gonna let the paint completely dry up. That way, I mean, it'll have a week at this point to completely cure, and then I can come back and wet sand it. I think I'll have to double check. There are rules about how long you have to wait to wet sand something after it's been painted, but I will double check that, and you'll see the final result in a future video, but for the most part you see the result in this one. So thank you for watching, thank you for your support, until next time.